Anyway. So starting in 3, 2, 1. At the time of the Declaration of Independence, a very important quote was made that the government is made by the people, for the people, and whatever it does for the people. The reason this is very crucial is that the bedrock of democracy, of what moves a nation, the reason why people want to engage with the political system is because they feel that it does not force them. Why is this very crucial? Because the framers of constitutions, the framers of the people who demand that you give your rights to the government, say that at the point where the government has people's rights and it has that encompassing right over them, the Leviathan, if you leave them alone, they can abuse it. When we say that people are not legitimate in their opting out of voting, which is a responsibility and not a must on the people, the reason it's bad is because it alienates the individual from the very system that he built to protect himself from. Two things in clarity. One, a stable democracy. A stable democracy is not equal to a democracy where people's needs are totally satisfied. Does not mean that there's no problem in these democracies. A stable democracy does not mean that at all points government is fulfilling everything. A stable democracy means that the rules of what must be followed are things that are done fundamentally. So, for example, countries like Ghana, countries like South Africa, they vote in free and fair elections. At least we think when you go to parliament, when you go to the lawmakers, they actually do the things that you want, and there's not so much corruption, there's not so much bad things going on. Does not mean in that state people still do not feel bad. Does not mean in that state people don't have hate from previous times before. Does not mean that people feel equally represented in such states. The second thing is the issue of legitimacy. In today's debate, the meaning for legitimacy that would establish from opening government is that it is rational, that it is okay that people can opt out of those systems, and the harms that will probably happen are no ones that are used, but even if we think it's one that individuals can still break from that regard.
You can rationalize someone killing or even stealing so they can...
I think I added a second caveat to that. That people and the harms that they get are ones that are justified to them, or it is not so much that we can allow people to do that. I think that effectively covers for the thing you say. Let's start first off with a comparative in a world in which everybody must vote and engagement with democracy and what it means. It's important as judges to critically assess when they say a democracy and engaging in it and vote, what do people want to come out of that democracy? I think the reason why it's important is that, as I said earlier, governments have so much power. So a couple of things must be done. One, to hold the governments accountable. Two, that no government is the, the wise dictator, there's a name for it by Plato or whatever, which means contribution to policy, contribution to holding the states accountable, making sure that the democracy lasts and it's something that is effective, and the reasons why we want people to engage. The question then becomes, without voting, can these things still occur? Yes, in a lot of ways. How? One, when people engage in advocacy, when you go out there and see that polluting rivers and turning waters into sludge and poisoning kids that are not yet born are bad, you contribute to holding the government accountable, you contribute to forming to policy. Things like engaging in think tanks. For example, in Ghana, there are people that have lots of political think tanks like the Urban Center, etc., Kofi Annan Center, where people do not need to vote for a party, people do not need to be there, but in the same vein, they can contribute to government policy, they can criticize the things that people do. For example, there's a lawyer in Ghana who does not vote, he's not politically aligned, etc., but he still fights for things such as LGBTQ rights protection, although he simply would not go out there to do that. Things like protests, things like citizen journalism, citizen arrest, things like town hall meeting attendances, etc., are ways people can do this. What does it mean? All the three very important impacts that these people can get on their side are things that we also would get on our side when we engage with democracy and keep it up, which means by a large extent, there's a lot of symmetrization of the impacts that it gets. But the second thing we talk about from political theory is the issue of political realism. Notice that in the real world, people simply do not have two things. One, the choice that they want, and two, the representation. I'll break this down with very vivid examples for you to grasp the picture of what I'm trying to say. 4 countries. One, in the USA, when you go there are 2 parties that no matter what happens are going to win, the Democrats and the Republicans. In Ghana, it's NDC, NPP. Zambia has the ZANU-PF and the People's Action Party. South Africa, ANC, EFF. The problem here is that maybe the choice you want to go and vote for the people you want, or the ideologies you want represented, are not ones that exist, or even if they do exist, are not people that will likely win because the system has been held hostage. How is the system being held hostage? I'm literally mechanizing everything I say. 3 ways. One, certain parties capture the state post-independence. So, for example, the ANC in South Africa, ZANU-PF that was led by Mugabe, in so many instances, in only countries like Ghana where newer parties are taking over, because they were the ones that fought for independence. They have that ties to them. It's not easy to break the sense of your literal liberators. But two, people have ethnic ties. For example, in Ghana, majority of Inuits and the Northerners are probably going to vote for the NDC, and Ashantis and every other person is going to vote for the NPP. Which means that even if you decide to go and vote or not vote like for who you want, they will probably not win if it does not exist between the binary of these two parties. And it's the same thing that happens in the USA etc. Because of other things such as elite capture or sponsorship, the people who want to control the largesses that the government has sponsors these parties to make sure that they make policy and make sure they take strategies that benefits them. And the ability for you to gather money to be able to vote and be in power and progress those things are not things that will happen. The first impact I mentioned as a result of choice is that even if you go out and vote, these people would not change, and either of the binary exists, and that is political realism on the binary. The second thing is that there's lack of representation. In most places, the person you want on the ballot box, it's not there. So, for example, I want to go to an LGBTQ party, right? Because I have so many people I know who are against etc. that I want them to be effectively represented. But there's no party in Ghana currently that does that. Which means at the point where I am forced to go, or I must go there, I go and vote against things that are deeply antithetical to what I think should happen and what I think is the right thing to do. Which means at that point, it is legitimate. You don't just stand up and create a party. You don't just stand up and monetize those parties and make sure that they win things. Which means at that time, it is legitimate and the right thing to do. And this is much more pernicious for people like minorities, etc., who do not get any representation at all. But the good thing and the incentive with political apathy is that it's an occurrence that makes political engagement become much more right or gives benefit to people. Why is this very important? It happens in two ways. One, when political parties realize that people aren't voting at all. I don't know if you know this, but one of the conditions of IMF and most bodies is to make sure that democracy is running right. There's a lot of election voter turnout. Like an example of this is why they send bodies to come and monitor elections from EU, from AU, from countries to see are people really engaging. Secondly, maybe the people who would vote for you for your area are people who are not coming. What do these people do? They go there, give them rice, give them oil, give them clothes, etc. Which means political apathy for those people when they are not coming incentivizes this government to go to those areas to give them things that they rather not give them on other days. At the end of the day, we think people should have the right to choose to engage or not engage. It is a legitimate choice of action. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. More importantly, understand that the core idea of democracy is the people's representation, right? The people choosing to engage in these political discussions, voting in these particular things that exist. Just wanting to tackle on what people said. The rule says that, people, minorities should not vote because at the end of the day, whatever they say will not come out. Because only the binaries will exist. Only people who vote for NDC and NPP that will win. If you vote for CPP or something, your view will not matter at the end. That is to say that those people should be shackled there forever. Understand, if 1 year 10 people of minority vote, the following year 15 vote, what does it mean? It tells the government that these people are becoming heavier day by day. It draws the government attention to them so that their needs can also be addressed. But Dorvlo tells you that because we are never going to get that representation, never vote, your voice is never held, you are always shackled and you'll be bottomed down forever and ever. You don't get any delta for those kind of people and we protect them better in that particular regard. Pan, understand, as I said, the core idea of democracy is representation. This is the backbone of what creates a stable democracy. 1, a working parliament. Secondly, a government that accounts to the people. 10, and the people who vote and demand accountability from the government through voting in that particular regard. But the law tells you that, there are other metrics that you can use to actually engage the government. Things like advocacy, activism, right? You cannot use activism to vote a government out or to draw a government out of power. What does it look like? It means that if you are advocating falls on deaf ears, how do you therefore hold the government accountable to all those particular things that the government is doing? You don't think you get any kind of incentive or data from the government to do anything from you? Right? Should be one.
So presidents can be impeached when MPs come together. They can actually get that, and votes of no confidence.
That depends on the level of representation that is in the government. If the people that are voting is poorly represented, we don't think there is an incentive from the parliament itself to impeach the government in that particular regard. Ghanaian parliament is more NDC than MPP right now? Do you think that there is any parliamentary way to actually impeach the president? No, because impeachment comes from the parliament. When the parliament is so biased, you don't get that need to be able to, because they control the laws that exist in the country. You don't think that particular thing is going to exist, right? Panel, understand, in status quo, we have people who randomly wouldn't want to vote, right? Why? Because they don't like a lot of things. They don't like the idea. The reason why they are voting and representing is because of the idea that it is legitimate. Their views matter in those particular things, right? At the point in time when you create that legitimacy, they all fall out and you reduce the level of representation that exists in the government, and that accountability that we get is poorly done. First, on argumentation, why do you think this is right? Because we think that democracy becomes less stable. Can't understand? Democracy is stable because people engage with it on three fronts. One, through political discussions. The reason why you tune your radio to things like NDC and NPP political discussions is because you want to have a feel of how the government is going and how the state is being run. Secondly, is the idea of elections itself. You don't want to vote at a point in time, so you want to partake on things like national discussions and national ideas that is running. Thirdly, it's because on things like constructive criticisms. The reason why media can take to the streets and people will actually criticize them is because they want to have a feel, they want to get idea and be able to vote in and vote out political government in that particular regard. When you legitimize this thing, what does it look like? When people disengage, that means there's reduced incentive for the people to take part in political discussions. Why is this true? One, we think that the core idea of political engagements is to be able to draw proper information to vote out or vote in political government. Because people understand there are things like swing people who would want to engage in things like just because they would want to vote. At a point in why this becomes legitimate and they draw out from voting, they don't have any incentive to do things like political discussions in that particular regard. We think that is very bad. Secondly, we think that there's reduced criticism to the government. People wouldn't have care. People wouldn't care about the government because now they feel like at the end of the day, whether they care, whether they want to criticize or they do not criticize the government, they are not going to vote. If they are not going to vote, why then did they need to vote? Engage in criticism that will hold the government accountable. How do you think that is very bad on two fronts? At the
end of the day, the free SHS policy might affect my livelihood or my economy, my business. So if I need to self-preserve, you still want me to know about these things. Democracy and not elections. Criticism is symmetric.
Okay, so Opana says simulation that. But understand what are the impacts of this? First, you get a government with less checking mechanism from the people in that particular case. Because if I analyze to you, right, understand the reason why there is huge criticism on these things is probably not because it affects me. There are people whose children are not in school. There are people whose children are in private schools and those things. They are still holding MPP accountable for the way it delivers the free education. Why? Because of the need for them to actually engage in things like this in that particular regard. Because of the idea of elections, the idea of voting. We think that is bad. You don't get that. Those kind of people don't come there. Secondly, is the idea of how you break down the stable democracy. You break down the core idea of democracy in of itself because of how less representative it becomes. Panel, understand. The reason why the close argument on emerging democracy and those things do not fly, I'll come back to that, but understand, we need a lot of people to be there to be represented. Regardless, there are MPP or CPP parliamentarians in parliament. At a point in time where you tell these people, because your views at the end of the day are not going to be upheld. Your views don't come out at the election board, no particular thing. You box all the small things, the incentive of those people or the small delta, these people can accumulate in order to emancipate in the democratic system for themselves. You box it away, you don't get any delta, you don't get any change for those particular people in those particular systems. At the end of the day, there is nothing for them. The other thing for you to know, more important, is that you create a lot of polarization in the system. Because understand, you're going to get some factions of the people who are likely going to vote. A lot of them who are not going to vote. What it then means is that you create a friction between those particular people. Those people who ideas are so much like Dorvlo, the government is so bad, you should not vote. Are going to see the others who vote as very bad. Why are you then voting that particular thing? We think those polarizations that exist in the systems become very bad at the end of the day. Panels, if for nothing at all, what do you get? We think that democracy in and of itself is stable because people are voting. We think that the stability of democracy stems from the government actually trying to do what the people want. Because when the people hold it accountable, the people call the government when it's doing things. People have representatives in government in no particular thing. At a point in time, I've analyzed to you how this legitimizing this particular thing is going to reduce the incentive of people to actually engage in political discussion and engage in things of national political issues. We think that you reduce the level of the level of accountability that they stem from the government. Second, you reduce the representation that people have, and you reduce the incentive of the government to Take a look at people like minorities. They are not able to burst out of their spaces. You think that is very bad for such people? Proud to bring from home.
I'll take those.
It doesn't mean
It depends. Voting at its very core, as a principle, is giving your consent to another individual that that individual should rule over you. There are certain precursors to consent. For you to give consent and to sacrifice your autonomy to that individual, you must make the conscious decision that you as an individual abide by the specific things that the person stands for. What you see is that in moments whereby you do not feel that that person aligns with you, it is principally legitimate for you to opt out of that particular agreement. The comparative in opposition's world is that irrespective of how that person is not representative of you, still consent to it, even when that consent breaches your personal autonomy, breaches your personal choice as an individual, and causes internal hurt and internal pain to you as an individual. That's the principle we stand by. The first thing I want to do is to do a couple of engagements to the specific things that we get from them. The first thing they say is to try to use tricky debate framing language. They say that what we say is that we say minorities should not vote. That's not what we say. We say that in circumstances whereby minorities decide not to vote because of specific reasons, and those reasons are legitimate, we think that it is legitimate for those individuals to vote in that regard. What we then get from them is that there is likelihood to be biased and there is likelihood to be less representation in our side. I'll flip this. There's actually likelihood to be less representation on their side. Because when the people that represent you recognize that they never satisfy your need, but each and every single time you consistently endorse them, then you begin to look like somebody who does not have the power. Because every single time they will not do what you want. Every single time they will get affront to your autonomy. But every single time you consistently endorse them. What that essentially means that the likelihood of those people actually representing you is significantly worse. The comparative in our world is that when you begin to opt out of the system, you send a message that I am not endorsing the specific thing that you do, and therefore in order to get access to certain things like one, swing voters to be able to make you win the election, you are more likely to be much more representative of those specific individuals. What that essentially means is that it is in our world whereby these specific minorities actually have a voice, because it's in our world that the minorities actually have some power. In their world, the minorities are powerless, they are constantly engaged in a system that does not represent them, and the people at the top see them as people that they can consistently use. The second thing that they recognize from their speech is that if it is true that not voting actually disrupts the system, and if it's true that voting is actually detrimental to a lot of individuals, that means that on the normal, people would have an incentive to actually vote. So the average minority on a normal day would want to vote. Why? Because it's something that probably impacts their life and all of those things. It means that at the point where a person makes the decision to disengage with the system, it means that they have consistently engaged with the system, and the system has not been representative for them, and that is the reason why they are not engaging with the system. Because if you know that the system is going to be representative of you, then your normal intuition is to vote. But you recognize that the system stops being representative of you. That's when you opt out of the voting system. Isn't that their work actually does not correct the wrong, but actually perpetuates the wrong for it to consistently exist in that regard. I think the final thing they then say is that not voting translates to you not engaging in the political system. No, I think that individuals have the capacity to engage in the political system regardless. Why? One, because it's actually like impacts their life as an individual. And this is quite crucial. Voting is their right, that voting is the accountability mechanism, it's actually a bad case for them. Because voting is not the way to keep people accountable. Why? One, it only happens in 4 years. It means about 5 years. So you wait every 5 years to keep people accountable. But two, accountability is actually calling the government out. And that happens after you have elected the person into power. It means that true accountability mechanisms actually exist after the voting. These individuals have an incentive to engage in accountability mechanisms. Why? Because they want the people to change the specific ways in which they are doing, but they don't want to endorse those individuals, because when you vote for them, you endorse them. Just because I don't endorse someone doesn't mean that when I don't like what the person is saying, I cannot call the person out. The final thing they then say is about the issue of legitimacy. They say it brings polarization. I'll flip this. Polarization is actually worse on their side, and it's actually much more perpetuating in their side. That's why I continue. I'll take it to you.
So refusing to vote means that you permanently sign an agreement to the system that you don't want any form of change.
That's not true. Refusing to vote means that you don't endorse the person that's coming to power, but you still engage in that specific system. Two, refusing to vote doesn't mean that you refuse to vote in perpetuity. People don't refuse to vote for the entire rest of their life. Usually it happens in specific instances whereby the system is not representative of them. What they have to prove is that voting actually makes the system representative of you, specifically when the system structurally proven by Dorvlo is not representative of you as an individual in that regard. I don't think that they have a case. Before I proceed, I'll take it.
So let's engage the Ghana debate. The NPP lost votes from the Ashanti region. They didn't vote. What has the NPP done for the Ashanti region after the Ashanti region?
First of all, that's an example analysis. The debate is not specifically about Ghana. It means that he has to extend this explanation to all other things. Secondly, our structural reasons explain to you why, independent of the context that specifically exists, this is a mechanism for you to be able to hold individuals accountable. I think that people have been incentive to hold people accountable because of all the things that's explained to you in that regard. I think what they were saying is about voting being what was it? Yes, political polarization. The reason why political polarization actually exists in their world is because people see not voting as illegitimate. Because we see that when you don't vote, it is illegitimate. When you don't vote, we call you out and we come and fight you. In our world whereby it is a legitimate option, we are not polarized anymore. We recognize people that do not vote and say that this is a legitimate option, and for that reason, we don't attack them. It is in their world whereby political polarization is something that's much more perpetuating, and it is in their world where political polarization is something that's really, really harmful. But I think it's quite crucial for you to understand the specific reasons why people decide not to vote. I think the first thing has to be the structural analysis as to why people do not get people to be representative of them. And it equally means that political parties that could be representative of you do not even come up in the first place. The reason why they don't come up in the first place because it's a zero-sum game. They waste a lot of resources, and at the end of the day, they are not able to get access to the good things that you are able to do that you want as an individual. But then secondly, some people in specific instances decide not to vote because of their own personal economic opportunity. Was, for example, you're a market woman who's consistently hustling. When you vote, you lose access to that money, which is important for you as a shelter and all of those things. You have to explain why in all instances, even in the instances of the market woman who has to not vote in order to cater for themselves, in order to support their life, they have to explain why that specific decision is legitimate, even when that decision is what upholds the life of that particular individual in that regard. I think it will be quite simple in today's debate. But the final thing there is to explain that even in their own framing, we explain why the system actually gets better over time by explaining why not opting to vote is an inclination that causes political parties to want to change your mind in that regard. The incentive exists. Why? Because one, they want to be able to take the swing votes. Two, they want to be able to get access to majority of individuals. This incentive explains why, independent of the context, they have a overarching incentive to be able to make sure that they are there for you. At the end of the day, it is legitimate not to consent to something that hurts your autonomy. You have to explain why you have to consent to something that hurts your autonomy as an individual, and that hurts your choice as an individual. We are proud to be doing that.
I'll take 2 periods. One more thing that a team has to take 3 periods. So yes, that's what in the matter. We didn't listen to peace speaking. But most importantly, they are having a zero-sum debate. Both these 2 teams. So let's start from these guys. These guys say democracy is not elections. Then it's what? Why? You see, he says democracy is not elections. I want you to take what they said for face value because we cannot respond to them. Dorvlo also says there's a reason we have things like AU, EU coming to watch elections. If elections were not a key part of democracy, why do we have overwatch bodies doing that? He has shafted his opinion effectively. 2, they want to have their cake and eat it. They say that, oh, if you don't vote, you can still do this, you can still do that, you can still do this, you can still do that. Then what is the utility of not voting? Let me tell you one case there, which is that it means you are endorsing someone who will potentially hurt you at that particular point in time. You know the issue with that form of debating? You are assuming that there's a unitary person to vote for, i.e. one person. You mean that after all the 12 political parties in countries, like, there's nobody in that country who can align with you too, because there's presidential general elections, some have senatorial elections, congressional elections, there's also parliamentary elections. So for example, many people in Gomwa do not vote for either NPP or NDC, but A+, who is the MP now, overwhelmingly got an amount of votes, and he's an independent. Gomwa is the only constituency in this country that has Wi-Fi throughout, all paved ways, and he organized a lot of business expos for them, even this Easter. It means that even at the point where there is no viability in majoritarian politics, there is also some utility that you can get if you tap into specific things. So for example, New York is getting a lot of advantages from Mayor Mamdani, even though Trump is still president. 2 things can be true at once, i.e. there can be a president you don't want, and on a lower level, a parliamentarian that is serving your interest. Secondly, I want you to note that they are not having the debate as it should be. Do you know why? This debate is not about disengagement from politics. No, this debate is about popular disengagement from politics, which means, check the bullshit, which means that to an overwhelming extent, I came to ask the CS, what does popular disengagement mean? They said it's the extent to which people disengage on a large scale from politics. Some of you are surprised they didn't engage this. This means that they have to explain why, at a point where disengagement is popular, what does something being popular mean? A, it is trending. It means that's a new thing. It's now trendy to not vote. B, it means if you want to vote, you are seen as someone who is enabling the system. So, for example, people made posts that if you vote for the NPP, you're supporting Galamsey, you're supporting corruption, because as they said, your vote is actually a use of your power to endorse somebody. 3, they say disengagement doesn't affect, doesn't cause so much harm. No, that's not true. Do you know why? Every vote that didn't go for Kamala Harris went into sponsoring anti-LGBTQ rhetoric. Every vote that didn't go to Kamala Harris went to sponsoring the overturning of abortion rights for many women. You don't sit down and say, because I didn't vote, it's only about me. That's not how democracy and social democracies work. Because my decision affects you. Your decision affects me. And that's why we all need to vote. Secondly, they've not explained even why popular disengagement is legitimate in a stable democracy. Note, so we can agree that popular disengagement is great in a democracy that is not stable, that is not credible. Right. But in a stable democracy that has stable elections, that has people knowing that there are things like usurpers, you have every right and every incentive to vote. He tells you that there will be polarization. Henaku says Henaku just mentions the arguments, says he will flip it and doesn't flip it at all. This is the analysis. Once you have an ancillary system where there's NPP, there's NDC, listen to our analysis. If Dorvlo is right, that always vote for a particular party, not just vote for a particular party, and we who are minority in the country say, they're doing only what the Ewes and Ashantis want, we will not vote again, because that's basically what he said. What does that mean? It means that ruling the country is left to the Ewes and the Ashantis. They do what they want with the country. And the politician doesn't care to come and appeal with you because he doesn't need your vote, because you are not voting in the very first place. The reason they come with rights, like the process, is they know that I will vote. So for example, during the Ablekuma North election, the parliamentarian brought TVs, egg and pepper, to the delegates who were at the polling site. Why were they at the polling site? Because they are about to vote. The eating at the party is at being at the party. Nobody takes food out from the party to give to those who are not at the party. We give to those who are involved. If you are not involved, there's nothing for you. Well,
Clarity.
Yes, you're slow.
See, there's nowhere in the motion that says that it must be what a popular thing. It's a public thing. If CA wants a clarity, everyone must know.
No. Everybody is free to ask the CAs for clarification. Secondly, if let's say there's public, the public is disengaged. What does public? Let's say the public is disengaged. What does it mean? It means a lot of people are disengaging. Let's take the second definition of public, which is that people are publicly disengaging, right? So it's not the public that's disengaging. We are just publicly disengaging. What does this mean? It means that we are coming out that we are not voting. We are coming out that people should not vote. He has engaged both sides of, I'm sorry you didn't notice that it was public. And if you had a doubt on what the motion was about, you should have absolutely asked the CA. Nothing in the WGC manual says the CA should tell everybody what the clarity is if you need it. But in any case, even if you take their case that it is not public, it's just disengagement inside minority. I told you that minorities can have small concessions. So for example, during Akufo-Addo's time, we had a record 8 independent MPs. To an extent where there was one MP was hanging in the hang parliament who chose where to balance. Look at Bekwai now, they have hospitals, they have tired roads. Galamsey has stopped there just because they didn't have a politician at the national level, but they had one at the parliamentary level. For you to believe Dorvlo, you have to believe that somehow in a stable democracy, where there's checks and balances, where there's things like systems that allow people to express their rights, there is not even one politician who would represent the interests of people. And that is simply not even possible. Proud.
Thank you very much for that speech. We will call upon the member of government to advocate for the case of the state here.
Yeah, I start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think the first thing is to throw away this sort of tricky analysis, right? And you have to understand, public disengagement, which is what the motion about, is not popular disengagement that Opana tries to lie to you about. And this is simple English, right? At the point where it's a public disengagement, it's two things. It means that one, people are doing it. Even if it is 10 people who are doing the action, it still counts as public disengagement. The second thing is that it's just in the open, like he says. So it means you're not hiding somewhere and saying you're not engaged, and 10 people could possibly come out and say that, well, they decided not to vote, probably for the reasons that opening government gives. This is not the same as popular disengagement. So a bulk of the impulse that he gives to you ascribed to popular disengagement from whatever clarity he got, I think that can't happen in debate, and we don't even have to waste time to engage them because they're simply out of the motion. It's really not important. This is the first I'm going to talk to you about. It's a very important thing to ensure a stable democracy, and it's trust in the system. It sounds very flippant, but focus with me, like work with me here, right? At the point in time where you want to have a stable running democracy and want to constantly ensure that individuals engage with all the systems that you have in place, they prevent things like insurgents, like riots, etc., and you actually want peace, you need people to trust the system. At the point in time when they trust the system and they see it as being something that actually seeks their best interest, that is the only world in which they are going to agree with the policies that people talk about. That's the only world in which the political engagements that OO tries to co-opt into their world are things that actually happen. The first part of my speech and the bulk of our case is going to explain to you why in a world without the legitimacy, the world that these guys are defending, there's going to be a mass level of distrust in the system, and that's going to lead to a breakdown of a stable democracy in and of itself. At the point in time when you see voting to be a mandatory thing like we talked to you about, what are the inputs? The first thing is quite simple. It becomes a coercive mechanism. What does this look like? At the point in time when individuals are properly unhappy and dissatisfied, like these guys talked to you about, it means that they deserve a right to opt out of it, insofar as it is democratic, insofar insofar as it is a society that upholds your rights and your ability to express yourself, we believe that at the point in time when you believe that it is not going to achieve those things, you deserve to actively opt out. In a world where it is mandatory or the opting out is illegitimate, it means that the choice inherently becomes flawed. At the point in time where it's a coercive mechanism, it means that at the point in time where you know there is nothing that you can do with respect to the voting, you cannot change it, it won't make you happy, etc. You are still forced to actively go there and go through all the stress involved in the voting, like during the long lines, pain, and all of those things. At the point in time where that becomes the reality, it means that it's literally antithetical to one, the stable democracy that we talk about, but two, the autonomy that these guys talk about inherently. But then the second thing equally is very essential, is that it takes away the prime way that they actively express displeasure with the government. Because you have to realize something, is that in the stable democracy, in the vast majority of instances, we see voting out to be the best way, first of all, that you can actively take these people out at the point in time when they don't represent you, etc. Because that's what leads to they having power. At the point in time when you do not do this, and you think that you are in a society that does not allow you to actively opt out of voting, these are the impacts. So for them, yes, Garshong.
So public disengagement means you come out about the disengagement. You can do that privately. It is not equal to being forced to vote. That clarity is very important.
I don't understand what you said, though. You can come around us in this case. Like, I gave a distinction. Opana. Yeah.
Yes, so come on, we don't see this point. And at every point in time, you can do things rather than not voting, which is including voting for another party. You're making you have to vote for the one who's making your rights. Why is that wrong?
Yes, so I think it is a rational thing, right? And guys, stay with me here, but this is a very reasonable thing. Voting is stressful. Like, you have to get out, waste a lot of time, go and join long lines, etc. At the point in time when you see that process to be zero-sum for you, i.e., whoever you want is probably not going to get the power due to the structures put in place like duopolies, monopolies, due to elite capture. They rightfully say that it is actually irrational and illegitimate to the actor, because it means you're actually harming yourself by making yourself uncomfortable, but you're going to do an action that's not going to represent you and not going to bring you utility. That metric in and of itself means that the action now becomes illegitimate based on Opana's PY. But let's get into pragmatism, like more important things, right? The first thing that happens in a world where voting is illegitimate is that you actually view the system to be bad and you view the system to be something that you do not align with. Why is this true? Because at the point in time where a system that's supposed to represent you doesn't respect you enough to give you the right to opt out of voting, it means that it's inherently not democratic, or it's something that you shouldn't even subscribe to in the first place. This is actually what leads to the political disengagement that Desmark tells you about, because at the point where you distrust the system, you see the system to be highly flawed, and even in those flaws, they don't give you proper mechanisms for redress. It is very bad. Why do we think it is extra bad? Because at the point in time when you see the system to be something that doesn't even allow you to opt out of voting, an integral part of you, it means that you immediately distrust other democratic systems that are supposed to work. So it means that the other peaceful and democratic means of ascribing like your change, that is doing through peaceful advocacy, etc., are things that you see to be unsuccessful, or things that probably won't work at the point in time when they see that voting is something that they've taken away from you, and your right to actually pull out of voting is something that is bad. The reason why this in and of itself further proves the illegitimacy is that it actually encourages people to seek other ways of expressing such displeasure. At the point in time when you do not see the system to be democratic and you don't see the system to have these more reasonable ways of doing things, that's what makes people go for things like riots. That's what makes people be more unreasonable with the manner in which they engage with their displeasure with the system at the point in time when they believe that the reasonable means are things that actually do not come as a result. The reason why this is very important is because at the point in time when individuals want to be radical, where individuals believe that the system is not a good one and that they have to go through other means of expressing their displeasure, it means that that in and of itself leads to an unstable democracy. That is what leads to the negative things that these guys talk about at the point in time when individuals simply don't want to engage with it. It's a simple thing. At the point in time when you are weighing the legitimacy of the action, it's two things. The way that it interacts with the actor and the way that it interacts with the society. We've already explained to you how when it comes to the actor, at the point in time when it does not represent you and it's a coercive mechanism, that is illegitimate in and of itself, as it undermines the extent to which you are an actor that can extend. You are an autonomous actor and somebody whose rights are literally upheld by the state. But in the second layer, I'm going to explain the illegitimacy, which is quite unique to us, is the manner in which individuals are going to disengage with the system. Because at the point in time when they see the system as being something that does not represent them and their autonomy as inherent human beings, it means that they are actively going to disengage. If they don't disengage, process like these guys talk about, it means that they are simply going to go to other ways of expressing their displeasure. That leads to all the riots, that leads to the destruction of public property, and that leads to all the negative things and all that. We are proud.
Thank you very much for that speech.
Nobody can be stateless. You can move between states, but inherently you have to exist in a state and be part of a state. This debate demands that this person or the people that we are talking about exist in a state which has a stable democracy. That means a perfect democracy, but according to OG, in a stable democracy, the rules are being followed and there's not so much corruption. But according to O2, there's a working government and a working parliament. In a democracy, there's a trade-off. This means that people cannot singly execute whatever they want to do, but they have to constantly contribute to the collective improvement and collective sustainability. So how is power allocated in a democracy? The power is allocated to people in government positions that function independently and affect different areas of the state. But people also hold the power to affect the state by doing something that is voting. Like in this world, advocacy, etc., it may still exist, but the sole power that is given by democracy is voting. So fundamentally, the people can only hold power to affect the state through voting, and that's the major means in which they can effect change in the state. Let me take a few.
A stable democracy only means you have stable democratic systems like separation of powers, but independent components like the economy can still be shaped. So if a lot of people see that all the democratic parties are killing the country and they have no alternative, the most logical voting option is to opt out because the alternatives don't work.
I'll get there in my speech, in the end of my speech. Why is this important? Without voting, we lose the mechanism that offers power to the average member of the state, which holds the structure of democracy. Democracy seeks to achieve these things. It seeks to achieve peace in the state and then the collective improvement of the people without forcefully undermining the ability of a member to live a dignified life because they don't necessarily buy into the collective narrative. Means if somebody doesn't buy into the collective narrative in a democracy, it's okay. They are not forcefully going to undermine your ability to live a life. And the DPM comes to tell us that voting is consent to decide who rules over you. But voting is contributing to the collective structure that decides who controls the frameworks that control the average person's life. Swing voters are still voters. They are not deeply rooted in one party, but tailor their vote to what benefits most people at a certain electoral time. Voting takes away, and they come and also tell us that voting takes away accountability mechanism. But there's things like midterms, there's things like the visible progress of the government and the visible decline of the effort, which shows the people that the government are not actually doing their work. And also, elections send a signaling effect to the next party or the next government about the structures that the previous party used to make their life less dignified. They use the, let me take your question.
Mention one party in the entire basis where only midterms exist. That's a midterm as taking someone out.
I'll get there. My partner will respond to that. But let me use the example of Ghana that they use. They say that in Ghana, people decide there's a lot of bias in the voting in different regions. But in this election, the NDC received major vote and major vote in also parliament. This sent a signal effect that the entire term that was served by the previous government, there were various structures that were set in that were constantly undermining people's lives, making it hard for them to live, showing that the next government should fix this. If they don't fix it, they are not going to vote. It shows the government that the people still have power to move them out. But let's go on to the case of rationality and where being legitimate means being ultimately rational. It is irrational to not exercise the most powerful tool that is accessible to you to change structures that fundamentally affect your life. Why? What does voting give you? fundamentally, voting gives you a chance to buy in, which is the most impactful means for the average person in the state. Like, you have the power to actively affect how the average person lives. And also, it goes to the signaling effect, like case, like voting also gives you the ability to give a signaling effect to the next government. But, like, most importantly, if you want to fix democratic issues and still get the benefit of democracy, you need more democracy or a leverage to buy into democracy. Why do I say this? More, like, in order to effect change in a democratic institution, you need to do more things like more voting, actively showing government that you don't want to buy into this thing. You need to do things like referendums, which involves people actively showing their consent for certain policies that they want. Also, you need to be able to, like, so like through referendums you can show policy changes, and then also you have representatives in government that represent the lay person. And what do? They also vote for policy. This shows that more democracy is needed to also fix democratic issues. But secondly, more incentive is given to vote to be able to, like, achieve leverage to majorly affect change in their democratic system more than the average person. If you feel like there's something wrong with the government, you need to actively find a way to buy into the structures, like, of government that can actively affect your life and actively affect the life of the average person. Okay, let me take your POI.
Yeah, so this is true, but it explains that some people don't get all of these benefits, they can't change things, etc. Why then do people who are locked out of these things still have to be forced to vote? What makes a forced democracy good?
I'll get into that. I have some response for you too. Vote. Lawyers come to tell us that voting is stressful, and that the trade-off of leaving your house and going to stand inside the sun and then voting is not worth not being able to get the power. Fine. We tell you that it is worth the trade-off, because the one time you have the power to actively affect your life, sitting down ignorantly is like, okay, so the one time you have the power to actively affect your life, it is worth the trade-off of a one-day inconvenience of not being able to do what you want. One day inconvenience, and then the power that affects the entirety of your life is like a major trade-off that we can consider it to be. But also, Lawrence tells us that it is not, it is like taking away people's rights to buy out. Hey, I'm coming. Lawrence tells us that in this debate, taking away people's right to be able to buy out of a system that constantly affects them is taking away from their democracy. But this debate is not a policy or a law that shows that opting out of voting is illegal. No, it just shows that is it a legitimate option or not. That doesn't mean that we are forced to not vote. You can still decide not to vote, but it is illegitimate for you to do so because, like, of the value you get from it, etc. But disengaging means that you don't. Disengaging means that you have lost agency. In democracy, you cannot just do what you like, but you have to actively follow the laws of the state. My second member of Parliament.
Am I audible and visible?
Yeah.
Alright. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. When we are all taught democracy in basic school, in secondary school, we're taught the pillars of democracy. What were those pillars of democracy? 1, an independent and free and fair media. 2, an independent judiciary. 3, checks and balances and free and fair elections. What this means inherently is that democracy of itself isn't only about elections. That's why openness claim that they are trying to knife our openness doesn't really count, and that there exists other ways for you to express democratic principles, even if you opt out of voting. At the end of the day, the judiciary can still check the government. Like, they can hold them accountable. The media can still call out. If they say voting is call out, the media calls out. And doing the funny thing about the media as a body does not vote, and they can still call out. I mean that call out is existent without you voting. At the end of the day, that case cannot stand in today's debate. Panel, a couple of observations. What the debate is actually about. One, on accountability. What they tell you. So what the debate is actually about. Because notice, they tell you that accountability is only existent when people vote. But who is the debate really about? Because from the open house, you get the idea that there are things like party loyalty. I mean that people will vote regardless. People will vote for MPP or NDC regardless. The debate about people who choose to opt out of this voting mechanism because they feel that their views are not representative. So look at the delta here. If they claim people voting is the only mechanism for checking mechanisms, and we prove that people still vote in our world because they are party loyalists, there's still accountability. The NPP will still hold the NDC accountable because the NPP loyalists will still hold the NDC government accountable. NDC loyalists will still hold the NPP government accountable. I mean that accountability still exists if it's only tied on voting. I mean that that's symmetric. But secondly, if they claim that you still want non-voting accountability, it still exists in our world. They say that, this will tell you that parliamentary impeachment, this will tell that parliamentary is biased. Fair, because then they still need to vote to elect MPs for them to, what they call it, hold you accountable. But notice other extensions, also mentions like advocacy, etc. What are the methods that are going to give you more beneficial? One, the court system. You don't vote for the court systems. The Supreme Court, the justice of the Supreme Court can still hold the president accountable through what they name. Trump was tried sent to the Supreme Court, and then his case was heard. There's still accountability. The media can still call you out. I mean, all those sorts of accountability still exist in a world that you don't vote. So in accountability, it is not inherently, it's very symmetric, and they don't really have a case at the end of the day. Now, what's the most important question in today's debate? One, on the idea of representation. Now, notice, the principle of representation, one, is the idea, it's based on the fact that you are extending a portion of your expression or a portion of your humanity to a shared identity. Because that's why you have to vote for a party that represents your views. When you are voting, you are extending a portion of your humanity and your identity. What this inherently means is that if you don't have a shared identity, it means you can't have a representation. If representation is supposed to mirror yourself, and you don't see on the political party, you don't see anyone that mirrors yourself, that principle of representation cannot exist. That's why Desmark's whole case about representation in this world is flawed, because he said that people choose to opt out of this vote mechanism because they don't have any representative figure for them to extend their identity or extend their expression to. So inherently, since the fundamental principle of expression is upheld now, win the debate. But notice, intuitive form, if what you are supposed to extend representation is not there, the best form of extend representation is not you not voting. Because I can't vote for another person that doesn't represent me at the end of the day. And why this is bad? Because the alternative Opana or like the entire Obeng solution is that one, you can vote for another party, another vote that Kwabena lost is a vote for Trump. It's not about you voting because the person represents your views. It's using you as a means to an end to stop an individual from coming to power. That's not true democracy, or that's not true representation, because the idea of representation is you extending your portion of yourself to something you believe in or something that you buy into. So representation does not really mean to debate. Or just snapping. Why does noise extension of cohesiveness waste out the class of representation? Because notice, when someone tells you not to wear a particular type of clothing, even though that clothing is a portion of your identity or an extension of yourself, you feel a certain level of discomfort, you feel a certain level of anger. In a world whereby they delegitimize you opting out and they force you to vote for another political party because at the end of the day, voting is the best way to express democracy. You subject individuals to a certain level of discomfort because they have to vote for people that they don't buy into or things that are not representative of them. That's why Lawrence's case on coercion is very important, because at the end of the day, they are subjecting individuals to a certain level of discomfort that comes to forcing them to vote for people that don't represent them. And do what this makes this case very impactful. The ridiculous case Opana talks about how this is popular and that a vast amount of people mean that if a huge amount of people, if you are buying that case, a huge amount of people choose to disengage, and you force them to engage with this strategy and vote for others that don't represent them, that's subjecting this huge amount of people to that level of discomfort or pain that comes with voting for somebody that doesn't represent you. You don't get this from OG, you get this from Mary's case on the idea of coercion. But on why Mary's case on coercion is important before that,
Yes. So you are saying that discomfort one day in 1,500 days is so big. But think about it, it's only a few people that are disengaging. Why would the government change because 10 or 100 people are complaining?
At the end, they put what's more. The discomfort is inherently illegitimate. It's the harm principle that certain people to pay, and discomfort is inherently legitimate. But secondly, at the end of the day, on the legitimacy of that coercion, the reason why people don't buy it, like the reason why courts or people don't buy coercive choice or choices that are done under duress or coercion, because at the end they take away the autonomy of the individual to make that rightful choice. In a situation where you've proven that you not legitimizing opt-out means that you're inherently forcing people to choose things that inherently they don't buy into. At the end, the inherent principle of choice that upheld elections in of themselves is undermined because the choice now becomes coercive and it becomes a flawed choice. You don't have that representation, you don't have that choice in that world that suggests individuals to a huge amount of discomfort. But a couple of cases to see you. The biggest case you get from them is signaling effects. Panel, we've proven to you that other alternative forms of mechanisms give you accountability, and all those metrics of accountability cause a signaling effect. Because now the next government knows that if they fuck up, the media will call them out. If they fuck up, the judges will call them out. If they fuck up, you can still tweet that these people are inherently bad individuals. At the end of the day, signaling effect is not inherently exclusive. And also the idea that people will choose to disengage from states in of themselves doesn't really make sense, because at the end of the day, if the central bank is making losses as a result of bad government policy, the money in my pocket is going to be affected. My inherent need to self-preserve and to fight for a better future for myself and my other people will still force me to engage in systems or try to hold people accountable. I still want to make sure the audit service in my country is working well. At the end of the day, I want the police people to work well at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, that performance affects my livelihood. People will still engage in structures to win this debate from CG.
The opposition will start to engage with the entire THBT.
So I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Let's start from a POI I asked them that if the motion is about public disengagement from voting, it means that you can have disengagement which is private. What we are arguing now is that they are forcing us to defend a world where voting has become mandatory, which is why I asked the POI. It is illegitimate to make your disengagement public, which means that you can have a disengagement which is private. You can decide to sit in your room and not complain about all of the things that is happening because you have chosen to disengage privately. But when you come out to make your disengagement public, it means that one, you encourage other people to follow your path, you post about it, you make noise about it, you discourage people from voting and things like that. That is what public disengagement looks like. I asked in the POI, they rubbished that POI. This is not new material. Please refer to me. Secondly, let's engage these guys on the other ways of participating in the democracy. Number one, they talk about the media. The media can be censored. It means that even if the right information is being churned out, specific people can be targeted so that they will not hear it. It means that once the government can censor the media, your ability to participate in that form of democracy is still short-handed. It means that not voting still has an implication. Number two, the judiciary. Listen, the Chief Justice is selected by the President. The Chief Justice oversees the judiciary. Things like appointing of judges to lower courts and things like that. It means that the President can still overwhelmingly influence the judiciary through the selection of the Chief Justice, which is why the young people were shouting when Justice Cotonou was taken out of the Supreme Court when Burma came to power, which means that the judiciary is still not a safe haven once the president still appoints the chief justice. Number 3, protest. Let's agree that you can go out. Do you know what happened during the anti-Galamsey protest in Occupy Julabi? People were beaten by the police, people were taken to prison, some people were bleeding, other people who even didn't know about it were arrested. Which means that protest is still not a safe haven for you. Why? Because they can still crack down on you, they can still lock you up. Number 4, voting. And this is where it is crucial. The comparative is 2. Either you disengage so that very few people vote, or you do not disengage so that the voting numbers are increased. When you disengage and very few people vote, it becomes easier for the government to rig the election. Why? Because fewer numbers are easier to forge. But when a lot of people vote in their millions, it becomes harder. Why? Because you have to justify how come let's say, registered voters are 17 million, and yet when we counted the vote, it's only like 3 million and things like that. It means that when people decide to vote, it becomes harder and harder for the government to rig the elections, which means that disengagement is very, very much detrimental. And let's come to our cases before I do that. Don't worry, I'll take you. Number 1, these guys talk about system in the distrust in the system, and also this representation, which is very much like reminiscent of what's happening in the opening. It means that my engagement would also engage the opening. Number 1, it talks about representation. You need to understand that in a lot of elections, there are very few scenarios where we have very niche group of people who are not represented. So when you go to America, the Greens have representation. Why? Because the liberals would want them to vote for them so that things like climate change policies and climate change investment will come. When you talk about the other minorities, the Asian minority, the Latinos and things like that, individually as a group, they are very few. But when they come together, they become a very important voting bloc. It means that there's seldom a situation where a unique group of people are taken out of the electoral representation, so much so that there's no message about them, there's no form of representation for them, nobody talks about them and things like that. These are extreme cases that they run, and hence you cannot buy it. Why? Because even if they are true, a lot of these people are coagulated. It means that, oh, we cannot specifically deal with the Latinos, but then we can deal with the diaspora as a group, so that the Nigerians are part of it, so that the Panamanians are part of it, so that the Venezuelans and things like that are part of it. Because they face similar problems through things like systemic disenfranchisement and things like that, we can address their issue generally and unilaterally. Even if it does not specifically deal with individual problems, at least generally we cater for them. There's representation, they are lying. Number 3, let's talk about the thing that they talk about, political realism and things like that. There are 4 responses that you need to understand. Number 1, the average person does not have a lot of problems. The average person is thinking about employment. The average person is thinking about security. The average person is thinking about reduced inflation and things like that. It means that these are issues that can be very easily catered for. When you refuse to vote, you know what happens? It is an endorsement of the system, which is why these people are trying to flip the case, but it's rather a flip on them. Listen to the logic. If you refuse to vote, it means that inherently you have decided that whatever is happening, you have taken yourself out of it, you have taken your ability to decide on that situation out of it. It means that if nothing changes, the system will still remain the same. On our side, the reason why there's a hope for change, even if it delays, is because in a stable democracy, voting patterns change. Today people are voting about wars, tomorrow people are voting about the economy, tomorrow people are voting about identity and LGBTQ and things like that. It means that even if it takes 20 years, in the very least, there will be a situation where your unique situation will be catered for. When you refuse to vote, you've taken away that future hope, which means that in the future, even if there's a chance to vote on a situation that uniquely affects you, because you have decided to publicly disengage, you don't have the incentive to come and vote. And when you decide to change your mind, people will backlash you. People will tell that you are being biased, and when the previous government was in power, you refuse to vote. Now you are coming out and speaking loudly. People will try to shut you up. But yes, OG.
If the Chief Justice is biased, the media is censored, they beat you when you protest, that's not a stable democracy. You see your angle.
It's okay, see, I get your POI. Ghana is a stable democracy. We've had democracy in the last 30 years. 4 years ago, people protested, they were beaten. Our media ratings reduced. Our corruption index increased. You cannot say that these things are not part of stable democracies. Why? Because any government, once you decide to protest, that government is threatened, and they'll use the security to calm you down. See, unless Nigeria isn't a stable democracy, ends has happened. Nigeria is a stable democracy. There are changes in the election cycle. Tinubu came to power because someone lost.
and then like a voting took place. There's the media in Nigeria, there's the chief justice in Nigeria. Unless they are saying that all of these things do not exist in Nigeria, then we can agree that this is not a stable democracy. Go and sleep. You need to understand the unique thing that we bring to the table is that voting is an expression of your being, especially in a democracy where you cannot do anything on your own. Which my pastor said, you cannot just take a gun to shoot someone. You cannot steal anybody's property. It means that once you refuse to vote, you have given up that unique right and ability for you to influence the system. The reason why that is bad is because as a person, you have given up your agency. It means that you have no right to participate in the democratic process. And on the converse, everything that happens also happens to you. You cannot change the structures. You leave the voting to a very few people, and in the end, you lose more than everybody. Proud.
Thank you very much, Desmond. Both panels to step out to deliberate. So please step out now for the panel to deliberate. Thank you.
Deliberation is inclusive of the recording, so I want to know which one of you will be recording. You said, yeah. Oh yeah. Do you guys consent to be recorded? You don't consent. To deliberation, Okay, then record your OA. Sorry. What about you guys? Do you consent to deliberation being recorded?